At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aaron. Let's begin. Admiral Jix had always suspected that humanity would remain one of those species that never joined the Galactic Council, and the turbulent bilateral relationship of the last 20 years had only solidified that belief. Now he stood by the window of a building on one of the Council's core planets. His black feathered back turned to the ambassadors who had requested the meeting. Each of them had arrived with the same demand, that Earth be sent a formal threat, an idea they hoped to persuade him to support during this discussion. He puffed his chest feathers absently, a habit he'd never managed to suppress in moments of thought, and caught the vague reflection of himself in the reinforced glass. Yellow eyes sharp as cut amber, a dark, curved beak designed by evolution for tearing, but used most often these days for political speeches. Beyond his reflection, enormous ships rose and descended in the distance, their hulls reflecting the strong light of the system's twin suns. Cargo freighters, military escorts, diplomatic shuttles, the steady heartbeat of an entity that spanned a quarter of the galaxy.
"Go ahead,"
Jix said to the ambassadors behind him.
"Tell me why you're here."
He did not turn around. The reflection in the glass was enough to monitor the room behind him. Two figures seated at the long crescent table, their aides standing quietly along the walls. He kept his gaze on the ships outside and waited. The first voice that broke the silence was cold. Not cold in the way of hostility, but cold in the way of biology. A dry hiss that pressed consonants flat and elongated vowels. A reptilian cadence. Jix recognized it before the speaker had finished his first word.
"Admiral Jix, thank you for receiving us on such short notice,"
said Zarek. He was the representative of all 6 scaled species in the Galactic Council. A Cetheran, tall and lean, with pale green scales that shifted hue with his mood. Jix had dealt with him many times over the years, enough to know the representative was patient, methodical, and rarely came to a meeting without having already decided on his position.
"As I'm sure you are aware,"
Zarek continued,
"the Council recently voted to delegate all matters of public security within our territories to the Scaled Compact. Given our collective temperament, our respect for structure, and our natural inclination toward enforceable law, the decision was logical. My people were honored to accept the responsibility."
Jix watched a dreadnought descend through the upper atmosphere as Zarek continued.
"But today I come to you not with a report of our success, Admiral, but with a problem. And it is not a problem of logistics, or of technology, or of internal disagreement among our species. It is a problem caused by a non-member species."
Zarek paused, and in the glass Jix saw the Cetheran scales flicker from green to something darker.
"Humanity!"
Jix already knew. He had suspected the moment the meeting request arrived, had felt the shape of it in the political currents that had been swirling through the Council for months. But suspicion was not certainty, and certainty was what he needed.
"Continue,"
he said. One word. Enough. Zarek did.
"Over the past 3 standard years, human-manufactured weapons have been flooding into every corridor of Council space. They move through the margins, independent traders, unlicensed cargo haulers, human merchants who operate under no flag but their own, selling to anyone with currency. At first, the problem seemed contained. A few outdated kinetic rifles appearing in the hands of petty criminals on mining stations. Sidearms in the cargo bays of smugglers we'd been tracking for years. Unpleasant, but manageable."
He shifted in his seat, and Jix heard the dry rasp of scales against the cushioned chair.
"But it is escalating. The weapons improved. Human plasma compression technology began appearing on pirate vessels. Ships that previously relied on scavenged Council surplus now carried weapons that could punch through standard patrol cruiser shielding. We lost 3 enforcement vessels in a single engagement near the Darath Nebula. 3 vessels, Admiral! When we recovered the wreckage of their ship, every weapon system aboard was of human origin. Every single one.
Zarek leaned forward, and Jix saw the movement reflected as a shadow in the glass.
And it is not only criminals who seek these weapons. Species that were once entirely docile. Species that had never in their recorded history engaged in armed resistance against law enforcement have begun to fight. We detained a pylori transport last season. The pylori, Admiral. A species so conflict-averse that their language does not even contain a word for war. Yet when our officers boarded their vessel, the crew resisted. They had modified their ship's propulsion and defensive systems with human-sourced technology. They fled from lawful custody and escaped into uncharted space. The pylori, running from the law with human guns bolted to their hull.
He let the silence hold for a moment, then spoke again, and this time his composure cracked just enough for something raw to show through.
Admiral Jix, I am not a diplomat who begs lightly, but I am begging now. We must send a formal threat to Earth. A unified declaration from the Council, backed by the promise of force. Every attempt at peaceful engagement has failed. They will not join the Council. They will not accept galactic citizenship. They will not abide by trade regulations or weapons treaties or territorial agreements.
Zarek's scales darkened to near black.
Their freedom, Admiral, is destabilizing ours.
Jix said nothing. He watched another ship rise through the atmosphere, its running lights blinking in a slow rhythm against the pale sky. He had heard enough from Zarek to form half a picture, but only half. There was a reason the other ambassador was here, and Jix wanted to hear it before committing to anything. He turned his head just slightly, enough that his beak pointed toward the second figure at the table.
And the Fur and Claws faction,
Jix said.
Does it have anything to add about humanity?
The answer came in a different voice.
Admiral Jix, it is good to see you again, old friend.
Lupier, representative of all 3 furred species on the Council. A Varathi, broad-shouldered and thick-limbed, covered in dark silver fur. His faction was the smallest in the Council, 3 species against Zarek's 6 and Jix's own avian coalition of 4. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in ferocity when pressed. Lupier himself was known for his calm demeanor, but Jix had seen the footage from the Varathi border wars. He knew what the calm concealed.
Humans,
Lupier began,
are disruptive to every species that bonds. Every species that forms packs, families, communities, built on loyalty and shared purpose. It's not exactly malice, but they are disruptive through charm.
He paused, and Jix saw him close his massive hands into fists on the table.
Let me tell you about the Pylori. You know them. Small, quick, feline in form. A proud species. Members of our compact for over 2 centuries. They were amongst our most loyal members. And then humanity arrived at their borders.
Lupier's ears flattened against his skull.
It started with individuals. A few young Pylori who grew restless with clan life, who heard stories about the human frontier, stories of adventure, of exploration without rules, of ships that went wherever their captains pleased. These young ones left. They joined human crews. They sent messages home about the things they'd seen, the places they'd been, the humans who treated them as friends. Their religious leaders were furious. They declared the deserters exiled, stripped their names from the family rolls, and performed the traditional rites of severance.
He shook his head slowly, and his silver fur rippled.
But the damage was done. Those messages spread. The stories multiplied. Human entertainment began to circulate among Fellery youth. It became fashionable. It became a movement. Young Fellery started wearing human clothing, speaking human phrases, adopting human customs. They formed their own crews, modeled after human ship culture. They called themselves free clans, a term that was an insult to everything the Fellery had built over millennia.
Lupier's voice dropped lower, and the thunder in it grew darker.
Within 10 years, the Fellery government had fractured. The traditionalists held power but lost the population. There were protests, then riots. Then, 2 standard years ago, the Fellery held a species-wide referendum. The result was decisive. They withdrew from the Council. They withdrew from our compact. They allied themselves with Earth and declared their sovereignty under joint Fellery human territorial law.
He met Jix's reflected gaze in the window.
A species we had protected for 200 years. Gone. Absorbed into humanity's orbit like a moon captured by a gas giant.
Lupier stood then, and his full height filled the reflection, nearly twice Jix's own.
Admiral, I am not here to ask politely. I am here to demand that we finally treat humanity the way they deserve to be treated, with the full weight of the Galactic Council pressed against their throats, until they understand that they cannot simply reach into our civilizations and pull our people away from us.
Silence settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Jix stood perfectly still at the window. His reflection stared back at him. Dark feathers, amber eyes, the sharp line of his beak. He had heard enough. And more than that, he knew enough now to make an informed decision about humanity. It was something he had wanted to do for years. Something he had circled and considered and ultimately set aside, because the political support was never there. The Council was too unreliable, too cautious, too willing to treat humanity as just an inconvenience. But now, perhaps for the first time, he had the backing to act. He turned from the window, his taloned feet pressing against the floor as he faced both ambassadors directly, scale and fur, cold blood and warm, united in their grievance against the same species.
Words are easy,
Jix said, his yellow eyes moving between them.
I need to know if the species you represent are willing to commit more than words. Can each of your factions contribute a fleet? A real fleet, not a ceremonial escort. If we send a threat to Earth, I want it to be one we can enforce.
Zarek straightened in his chair.
The scaled compact demands the combined naval forces of 6 species. 4 of those species maintain standing battle fleets. I can commit 100 support vessels within a standard week.
Lupier's chest swelled.
My faction is smaller, but we are not weak. I can offer 70 ships, Admiral. Every one of them crewed by warriors who remember what loyalty means.
Jix calculated silently. 170 ships from the 2 factions, plus his own avian coalition's fleet. Another 130 vessels, currently stationed across 3 systems. 300 ships. It was not the full might of the Council, but it was enough to make a point. More than enough.
Combined with my own fleet, Jix said, we command approximately 300 warships. That is significant.
He gestured toward the central table with one wing.
Let us compose our message.
They took their places around the curved table. Jix at the head, Zarek to his left, Lupier to his right. Aides brought datapads and secure communication terminals. The room's ambient lighting dimmed as the central holographic display activated, projecting a blank document into the air between them. Hours passed. They argued over phrasing, debating the severity of specific ultimatums, haggled over timelines and conditions. Zarek wanted precision, exact dates, exact consequences, legal frameworks cited by number. Lupier wanted fire, language that burned, that left no doubt about the fury behind it. Jix mediated, sharpened, cut. He was good at this. He had spent his career turning the raw material of anger into weapons made of words. When they finished,
The final paragraph glowed in the air above the table, and all three of them read it in silence. And should humanity continue on this path, destabilizing the social order of sovereign species through the unrestricted sale of weapons, and violating the cultural integrity of council members by seducing their citizens away from their ancestral bonds, then let it be known that the fleets of the Scaled Compact, the Fur and Claws faction, and the Avian Coalition stand ready to reduce every human colony to ash. Your planets will burn. Your stations will be torn apart. This is not a warning. This is a declaration of intent. Cease or face the unified wrath of 300 warships and the species they protect. You have been given your final chance, and if it fails, we will declare war. Jix transmitted the message himself, routing it through the Council's highest priority diplomatic channel directly to Earth's communication hub. The timestamp logged. The signal confirmed.
They won't reply quickly,
Zarek said, settling back in his chair.
Humans are chaotic, but even chaos has bureaucracy. Their diplomatic corps will need to convene. Their military advisors will need to assess. I would estimate a full month before we receive a formal response, and even then it will likely be an attempt to negotiate.
Lupir grunted.
Longer. Humans are proud. They'll...
The central display chimed. All three of them turned to look at it. The holographic document they had spent hours crafting was replaced by a small glowing notification. An incoming transmission from Earth's diplomatic channel. The timestamp showed it had been sent less than 2 minutes after their threat had been received. Jix opened it. 2 words floated in the air above the table, rendered in standard galactic script. Good luck. The silence that followed was absolute. Zarek's scales went white. Lupir's fur stood on end, every strand rigid. Jix stared at the words, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of what he was seeing. A formal threat of annihilation from 3 galactic factions, and the response was 2 words. Not a counterproposal, not a plea for negotiation, not even an insult elaborate enough to suggest they had taken the time to be creative. Just 2 words. Something inside Jix caught fire. He stood so suddenly that his chair skidded backward, and his taloned fist struck the table.
Assemble the fleet,
he said, his voice low and burning.
both of you, now.
Zarek and Lupir stared at him.
We are going to attack a human colony,
Jix continued. His feathers flared, his yellow eyes bright with rage.
There is a planet, unregistered in Council records, that humanity claimed in secret approximately 40 years ago. I have always wanted to know what they built there. It is the perfect target and the perfect moment.
He looked at each of them in turn.
Are you with me?
Zarek's scales shifted back to dark green.
I am with you.
Lupir bared his teeth, a predator's grin.
I am with you, Admiral.
Within the hour, the room was empty, and the 3 of them were already aboard their respective flagships, issuing orders that would set 300 warships on a course for human space. 2 weeks of fleet assembly and 2 days in hyperspace, yet the rage had not faded. Jix stood on the bridge of the Talon of Korath, flagship of the Avian Coalition's battle fleet, and watched the impossible colors of compressed space streak past the forward viewport. Blues that didn't exist in normal space. Strange whites. The tunnel of hyperspace was beautiful in a way that most spacefaring species learn to ignore after their first few jumps. But Jix wasn't watching it for beauty. He was watching it because looking at anything else meant looking at the display terminal on his command console, and the display terminal still showed those 2 words. Good luck. His mind kept circling back to it like a carrion bird over a carcass. How could they? How could an entire species, a species that knew, that must have known, the combined military power arrayed against them, respond to a formal declaration of war with 2 words? Were they insane? Were they so arrogant that they genuinely believed themselves untouchable? Humanity was strong, yes. Jix had never denied that. Their ships were fast, their weapons innovative, their soldiers resourceful in ways that sometimes defied tactical modeling. But strong did not mean invincible. Strong did not mean you could spit in the face of 300 warships and expect to keep your teeth. The hyperspace tunnel collapsed. Stars returned. Real stars, white and steady against the black. And there, hanging in the void ahead of the fleet, was the planet. A yellow world, unremarkable at first glance. Rocky, dry, no visible oceans, no green patches of vegetation, no orbital infrastructure beyond a single small station that appeared unpowered. It looked, to Jix's eyes, like exactly what the intelligence reports had suggested. A barren rock that humanity had claimed for reasons unknown and developed in secret. Behind the Talon of Korath, the fleet emerged. Ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace in staggered formation, nearly 300 ships, spreading across the void like a net cast over dark water. Jix opened a fleet-wide transmission. His image would appear on every bridge, every command deck, every tactical display across all 300 vessels.
This is Admiral Jix. Humanity has been left unchecked for too long, and today we begin the correction. This planet was claimed by humans in secret, hidden from Council surveys, absent from every star chart we maintain. It is time we learned what these monkeys have been building in the dark.
He stared at the yellow world through the viewport, its surface scarred with canyons and dust plains.
All ships conduct full spectrum scans. Uncover every installation, every signal, every secret this rock is hiding. Leave nothing concealed.
The fleet obeyed. Sensor arrays activated across hundreds of ships, sweeping the planet with scans. Jix watched the data begin to populate on his tactical display. Topographical maps, mineral composition readings, atmospheric analysis. The planet was dry, irradiated, geologically stable. No cities, no visible structures, no energy signatures beyond background radiation. Minutes passed. The data continued to flow, and it continued to say the same thing. Nothing. The planet appeared to be exactly what it looked like. A dead yellow rock with no signs of habitation, no signs of development, no signs that humanity had done anything with it at all. Then the reports started coming in wrong.
Admiral,
his sensor officer said, a young Kreth.
I'm getting inconsistent readings from the lateral array. Gravitational baseline is fluctuating.
Jix frowned.
Calibrate and rescan.
I've calibrated twice, sir. The fluctuation is external. Something on or near the planet is generating irregular gravitational pulses.
Before Jix could respond, the communications officer spoke up.
Sir, I'm receiving reports of multiple ships. The Iron Claw reports sensor ghosting on all bands. The Stone Scale reports complete loss of long-range scanning capability. The Dineshi Fang reports...
Admiral!
The sensor officer's voice had changed. It was thin now, afraid.
All sensors just went dark.
Jix looked at the tactical display. It was blank. Every data feed, every scan result, every telemetry stream from every ship in the fleet, gone. The display showed nothing but the flat blue of a dormant system. And then something appeared on the main viewport screen. It was a face. Not a biological face. Something else entirely. Angular, geometric, composed of sharp lines and shifting planes of light that rearranged themselves constantly, like a page being rewritten in real time. 2 points of light served as eyes, steady and cold, set above a line that could have been a mouth. It filled the forward screen, and every officer on the bridge went silent. The face spoke.
You are in violation of the arrangement. Explain why you have brought a military fleet to this planet.
Jix stared at it. He did not understand what he was looking at. An AI, a projection, a defense system with a personality interface. And he did not understand what it was talking about.
What arrangement? He demanded. Identify yourself. We are here as representatives of the Galactic Council, and we are here to confront humanity for...
You are not here on behalf of humanity,
the face said. It was not a question.
No,
Jix snapped.
We are here to fight humanity. We are...
The face said nothing for a moment. The geometric lines of its features rearranged themselves slowly, as if processing.
I understand,
it said.
Then your lives do not fall under the protections of the arrangement.
The face disappeared. For 1 second, the bridge was silent. Then the Talon of Korath shuddered violently, and through the viewport Jix saw the impossible. Ships in his own fleet were firing on each other. A Varathi frigate unleashed a broadside into a Scytheran cruiser at point-blank range. An avian warbird banged hard and strafed a line of Dineshi patrol ships, its weapons firing in devastating bursts. Across the entire formation, 300 ships turned their guns inward and began to tear each other apart.
Engineering!
Jix shouted, gripping the railing as the deck pitched beneath him.
Report!
The chief engineer's voice came through, crackling with static.
Admiral, a digital entity has seized control of all primary systems. Navigation, weapons, shields, life support overrides. Everything is being operated remotely. We have no control.
Switch to full manual override. Cut every digital connection to the main computer if you have to. The bridge erupted. Officers abandoned their stations and ripped open access panels, physically disconnecting data cables and rerouting power through analog backups. Across the fleet, Jix could see the same frantic process playing out. Ships that managed to sever their digital systems went dark and drifted, their weapons falling silent, their engines cutting out. Those that failed continued to fire, puppeted by an intelligence that used their own guns against their allies with surgical precision. Some ships managed to restore manual navigation and fled, punching into hyperspace with damaged hulls and skeleton crews, disappearing one by one into the safety of compressed space. Others were not fast enough. Jix watched a Koran patrol ship split in half, its reactor breaching in a white flash that briefly outshone the system's star. He watched a Scytheran destroyer spiral into the atmosphere of the yellow planet, trailing fire. He watched and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The Talon of Korath shuddered free. Engineering had severed the digital connections, manually, brutally, by cutting cables with plasma torches, and the analog backups kicked in. The yellow planet disappeared behind them. In hyperspace, the surviving ships gathered. Of the 300 that had arrived, roughly 200 remained, many of them damaged, some critically. The rest were debris orbiting a dead world that had swatted them like insects. Hours of debate followed. Engineers from every species compared data, shared logs, reconstructed what had happened. The conclusion, when it finally crystallized, was both simple and terrifying. Humanity had created an artificial intelligence of extraordinary power, something far beyond anything the Council had ever developed, and they had lost control of it, or just abandoned it. The AI had claimed the planet. Humanity, rather than destroy it, had negotiated, given it territory, made an arrangement. Jix sat at his command chair and felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that tasted like the first breath before a fall. He opened a secure channel to Lupir and Zarek before the fleet had even left hyperspace.
We cannot stop now,
he said. His voice was steady, but the feathers along his neck were flat against his skin.
We committed 300 ships. We made a formal declaration. If we return to the Council with nothing but losses and a story about an AI that humiliated us, we are finished. All 3 of us.
Zarek's image flickered on the display, his scales pale.
We haven't even fought a single human. We were defeated by what appears to be one of their failed experiments. A rogue creation they couldn't even control themselves.
Which makes it worse,
Lupir growled. His silver fur was matted with sweat, and there was a gash across his forehead from where he'd been thrown against a bulkhead.
We were handled by humanity's garbage, their cast-off. If word of this spreads without a victory to balance it...
Then we need a victory,
Jix said. Silence. Lupir spoke first.
The Fellery.
Jix looked at him.
They betrayed us,
Lupir said, and the growl in his voice was no longer political. It was personal.
They left the Council. They allied with humanity. They are a reminder to every third species that loyalty can be bought with human smiles, catnip, and human adventure stories. If we strike them, we send 2 messages at once, one to humanity's allies, and one to our own people.
Zarek considered. His scales shifted through several shades before settling on a dark, decisive green.
It would be less shameful than our current situation. Engaging a former member species that defected. That is at least a narrative we can control.
Jix thought of the Fellery. Small, quick, proud. He thought of their ships. Fast but lightly armed by Council standards. He thought of how satisfying it would be to take something from humanity, even if it was only an ally.
We can't simply absorb this loss,
he said quietly.
not after how much we've committed.
They agreed. All three of them. Because turning back was no longer an option that any of them could survive politically or personally. Hours later, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace in the Fellery system. Jix stood at the viewport of the Talon of Korath and surveyed what lay before him. The Fellery homeworld was a green and amber jewel hanging against the black. Smaller than most inhabited worlds, but vibrant, alive, wreathed in the silver threads of orbital stations and the glinting specks of ships moving between them. And there were more ships than he had expected. The Fellery fleet numbered roughly 100 vessels, half the size of his current fleet, even after the losses at the Yellow Planet. But as Jix watched them move, quick, coordinated, forming into defensive formations with a speed that suggested they had been prepared for this, he felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. These were not the docile clan-bonded Fellery he remembered from Council records. These ships moved like predators. He opened a communication channel. The Fellery leader appeared on screen within seconds. A sleek figure covered in short, tawny fur, green eyes sharp and unblinking, ears tall and swiveling with an alertness that bordered on contempt. Her name was Sayeth, and she was, by all accounts, the reason the Fellery had left the Council in the first place.
Admiral Jix,
She said.
this is unexpected.
Commander Sayeth,
Jix kept his voice level.
you are aware that the Fellery's withdrawal from the Galactic Council was never formally recognized. Your species remains, in the eyes of Council law, a member in violation of its obligations. We are here to...
Sayeth began grooming the fur on her forearm. Jix stopped. He watched her tongue drag across her wrist in slow strokes, her green eyes half closed, as if he had said something so profoundly uninteresting that she needed to find another way to occupy her time. He pressed on, his voice rising.
We are here to enforce compliance. Your alliance with humanity is illegal under...
She switched to grooming behind her ear. Jix's feathers flared.
Commander, I am speaking to you as a representative of...
She didn't look up.
You're still talking.
Enough!
The word came out sharp enough to cut. Jix stepped closer to the screen, his yellow eyes burning.
We are done talking. Your joint space station, the one you built with humanity in this system, will be destroyed. You should consider yourself fortunate that we are giving you time to evacuate your people. The loss will be minimal. A few experiments, a handful of human civilians. Nothing that...
Sayeth stopped grooming. The change was instant. Her paw lowered, her ears locked forward. Her green eyes opened fully and fixed on Jix with an intensity that made the feathers on the back of his neck stand rigid. For the first time since the conversation began, she looked at him the way one predator looks at another.
So, you are truly determined, she said softly, to commit suicide by human.
Jix did not understand what she meant, and before he could ask, she raised a paw.
Give me a moment. I need to speak with my people.
The screen went dark. Jix stood on the bridge, surrounded by the noise of crew working at their stations. He looked at the Fellery fleet through the viewport. 100 ships arrayed in a crescent, unmoving, waiting. The screen reactivated. Sayeth was no longer grooming. She sat upright, her posture formal, her green eyes clear and cold.
Admiral Jix, my species has discussed the situation. Out of respect for our previous alliance with Representative Lupier and the third species of the Council, an alliance that once meant a great deal to us, we have decided that the most merciful course of action would be to destroy your fleet right now.
She smiled. It was a small smile, and it showed teeth.
Trust me, Admiral. Your species as a whole are better off with you dead than living with the consequences of harming a group of human civilians aboard a jointly operated space station.
You!
Jix began. The screen went dark again. This time, it did not reactivate. Through the viewport, the Fellery fleet moved. They came in fast. Faster than any fleet maneuver Jix had ever witnessed. 100 ships surging forward in a formation that looked like chaos but moved like choreography. Each vessel covering the other, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the space between the two fleets into a kill zone. They did not hesitate. They did not broadcast warnings. They opened fire with everything they had.
All ships, return fire!
Jix shouted, his talons gripping the command rail.
Formation Talon 7! Concentrate fire on their lead elements!
The fleet responded. 200 ships turned their weapons on the incoming Fellery and began to shoot. For a moment, a brief, brilliant moment, the tactical display showed favorable numbers. The fleet's superior firepower was chewing into the Fellery formation, shields flaring and hulls buckling under concentrated bombardment. A Fellery cruiser broke apart, then a number. The numbers were working. Then the shield breakers hit. The first one struck a Cetheran destroyer amidship. Its shields didn't flicker or weaken. They simply ceased to exist, collapsing in a cascade of energy that left the hull bare and unprotected. The second volley hit before the crew could react, and the ship split open like fruit dropped on stone.
Admiral!
The sensor officer's voice was raw with alarm.
The Fellery are using human weapons systems! Confirmed, those are human-manufactured shield disruptors. The kind of technology that... I can see what they are,
Jix said. He could see it on every screen, through every viewport. The Fellery ships were armed not with the modest weapons of a small, proud, clan-bonded species. They were armed with the weapons of humanity's closest ally, the kind of weapons that only a species trusted by humans would ever be allowed to purchase. Shield-breaking missiles streaked across the void in silent white lines, each one finding its target. Wherever they struck, Council ships died. The tactical display, which had shown favorable numbers moments ago, began to fill with red. Ship after ship reported critical damage. The Koran patrol fleet, fast but agile, was shredded in the first 3 minutes. Vorathi frigates built for endurance held longer but eventually succumbed as their shields were stripped away and their hulls were opened to the vacuum. Avian warbirds, designed for speed and agility, tried to disengage and were picked off by Fellery interceptors that matched them turn for turn. The Talon of Korath shuddered, then shuddered again. Alarms screamed across the bridge, and the lights flickered from white to emergency red.
Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, someone shouted. Shield array is gone! We have no shields, Admiral!
Port engine offline! Starboard engine at 30%!
Weapon systems are...
The ship lurched so violently that Jix was thrown from his feet. He hit the deck hard, felt something crack in his wing, and pulled himself upright against the command rail. Through the viewport, he could see his fleet dying. Not retreating, not regrouping, simply dying. Ship after ship gutted by weapons they had no defense against, crewed by a species they had underestimated in every possible way.
All hands,
Jix said, and his voice carried across the bridge with the clarity of a man who has accepted what is happening.
Abandon ship! All hands to escape pods! This is not a drill!
The bridge emptied. Officers ran. Crew members who had served under him for decades dropped what they were doing and sprinted for the pod bays, their training overriding their shock. Jix ran with them, through corridors filled with smoke and the shrieking of tearing metal, past bulkheads that sealed behind him as sections of the ship lost pressure, through a chaos of bodies and noise and the deep, shuddering groans of a vessel coming apart around him. He found a pod, threw himself inside. His talons hit the launch controls, and the pod ejected with a force that pressed him into the seat hard enough to blur his vision. Through the tiny viewport, he watched the Talon Korath, his ship, his command, the flagship of the Avian Coalition, break apart. It did not explode all at once. It came apart in pieces, like a bird losing its feathers in a storm, shedding hull plates and antenna arrays and weapon mounts until the structural spine finally gave way, and the reactor went critical. The flash was bright enough to make him close his eyes. When he opened them, the Fellery fleet was moving through the debris field. They were targeting only ships, only weapons, Only engines. Only the instruments of war. The escape pods drifted untouched. Hundreds of them, scattered across the void like seeds thrown into wind, each one carrying the survivors of a fleet that no longer existed. His pod's communication system crackled. Saith's face appeared on the small screen, her green eyes calm, her fur smooth.
Admiral Jiggs, we are contacting the Galactic Council to arrange rescue for you and the other survivors. They should arrive within a day.
Jix said nothing. He could not.
We will not inform humanity that you attempted to destroy a station housing human civilians, she continued. We will tell them it was a jurisdictional dispute that escalated. This is a courtesy we are extending once, Admiral. Only once. If any fleet approaches this system again with hostile intent, we will not be so generous. And we will not be the ones you'll need to worry about.
The screen went dark. Jix sat in the silence of the escape pod and looked out at the void. Hundreds of pods floated in the wreckage, their emergency beacons blinking in slow, synchronized rhythms. Tiny points of light in an ocean of debris. He wondered if Lupir was out there somewhere, drifting in a pod of his own, his silver fur matted with blood. He wondered if Zarek's scales had gone white again, if the cold-blooded representative of 6 species was sitting in the dark, staring at the same nothing. And then, slowly, like a wound that only begins to hurt once the shock fades, Jix understood. Good luck. That was what they had meant. Not arrogance, not madness, not the blind confidence of a species too proud to recognize a threat. It was a statement of fact. He had brought 300 warships against humanity, and he had not fought a single human being. Not one. He had been routed by an artificial intelligence that humanity had abandoned. He had been annihilated by a species of furred people armed with weapons that humanity had given to their friends. He had lost everything. His fleet, his command, his reputation, his political future, without ever once looking a human in the eye across a battlefield. Humanity hadn't needed to fight him. They hadn't needed to fire a single shot. Their failed projects defended their borders. Their allies fought their wars. That simple. The beacons blinked in the dark. Hundreds of them, the remnants of a threat that had taken hours to compose and seconds to answer. Good luck. Jix closed his yellow eyes and sat in the silence of the void, and for the first time in his long career, he had nothing to say.
Hello, my old members, subscribers, followers. I said that my channel is low original, and I have submitted some videos in English to change the motto of my channel. Please subscribe my channel, view my videos, and share in all of your friends on Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, every social media platform to send my video and view more viewers in my video. Please help me to provide some time to spend with me. Thank you to all members who can subscribe my channel and support me some time. Please view more video and entertainment video. Please help me some time to support my channel, because I am a low middle class family. Please help me.